It was one of those nights when the air itself seemed heavy with rank and power. The Officers' Club in Washington, D.C. wasn't just a bar. It was a theater of status. Medals gleamed under the chandelier light, old war stories floated between cigars and whiskey glasses, and the waitstaff moved silently like shadows, careful not to disturb the egos in uniform. And me, I was one of those shadows. My name, at least the one I live by now, was Evelyn Carter. People saw an ex-army woman turned waitress, a nobody who poured drinks and carried trays. That was the role I played, and most nights I wore it like armor. But here's the thing nobody knew. I hadn't always been invisible. Once, I was the sharpest linguist in my unit, the one they called when a code had to be cracked, when a strange dialect might mean the difference between an ambush and survival. I'd earned respect the hard way, through sweat and blood on foreign soil. But a fire 5 years ago stole all that from me. My father, a decorated general, died that night. Or at least that's what the papers said. My name died with him. Since then, I've lived as a ghost, tucked behind an apron, waiting tables for the same kind of men who used to salute my family name. That night, the room buzzed louder than usual. The Pentagon brass were in, along with a few corporate giants who liked to mix war contracts with bourbon. At the center table sat General Douglas Reeves. You didn't need to be told he was important. The way people leaned in, laughed a little too hard at his jokes, it told you everything. Reeves wasn't just a general. He was a kingmaker, the kind of man who could make or break entire careers with a phone call. I'd served him before. He never looked at me. He looked through me, the way people look through glass when they're searching for something more interesting beyond. But tonight he decided to notice me, and not in a good way. It started with a piece of paper, yellowed, folded, stamped, classified. Reeves was showing it off like a party trick, bragging to the younger officers at his table. "Pick this up from the archives," he said, tapping it with a thick finger. "Some ancient World War II code, written in half German, half something else. Even the NSA geeks can't figure it out." He grinned, savoring the attention. Imagine that. 40 years of taxpayer money and they can't read a few scribbles. That's when his eyes landed on me. It was the kind of look a man gives when he's already decided you're a joke. He waved the paper like it was a toy. "Hey, sweetheart," he drawled, his voice cutting across the room, drawing every head to our corner. "You look bored. Tell me, ever take a college class? Maybe you can do what the experts can't. Here, translate this." The table erupted in laughter. One of the captains nearly spit out his drink. Another muttered something about a waitress saving national security. My stomach twisted. I felt the blood rush to my face, but I kept my expression flat, the way I'd been trained, invisible, harmless. Inside, though, it burned. You ever swallow down so much humiliation that it feels like acid sitting in your chest? That's what it felt like. Because the truth was, I could read it. I'd studied the same hybrid codes my father used during his black ops days. I'd cracked tougher ones in Afghanistan, the kind that carried lives in their letters. And here was this man, this decorated war hero, waving my very skill set in my face like it was a joke. "I'm sorry, sir," I said quietly, my voice smooth, rehearsed. "I'm just here to take your orders." But Reeves wasn't letting it go. His smirk widened, feeding off the room's attention. "Come on now, don't be shy. What's the worst that can happen? You mess it up and we all laugh. Or maybe you surprise us, huh? Show us that even waitresses get lucky sometimes." That word, waitress, he spat it like it was dirt on his boots. The younger officers chuckled, nodding along, enjoying the show. To them, I wasn't a veteran or a soldier who'd bled for the flag. I was just a woman in black slacks with a tray in her hand, a servant. I stood there holding my tray against my hip, heart hammering. Every instinct screamed at me to walk away, to let the insult slide like I always did. Keep my head down. Stay small. Stay safe. But then I caught my reflection in the glass wall behind him. For a second, I didn't see Evelyn Carter, the nobody waitress. I saw my father's eyes the way he used to look at me before a mission. Steady, expectant, proud. And that's when something shifted inside me. I knew in that moment, if I stayed silent, I'd be betraying more than myself. I'd be betraying everything I once was, everything I'd been taught to be. Reeves thought he was humiliating me. What he didn't realize was that he'd just cracked the shell I'd spent 5 years hiding in. I didn't reach for the paper, not yet. Instead, I let the silence hang heavy, long enough for the smirks, to waver, for the laughter to thin into awkward coughs. And though my hands trembled behind the tray, my voice, when it finally came, was calm, too calm. "Be careful what you ask for, General," I said softly. "You might not like the answer." The room went dead still, and just like that, the game had changed. You know how sometimes a room full of people can make you feel smaller than you've ever been in your life? That's exactly what it felt like standing there, holding that tray, with every pair of eyes waiting for me to fail. And truth be told, part of me wanted to just walk away. I could have bowed my head, muttered "Sorry, sir," and disappeared back into the kitchen like I'd done 100 times before. That would have been the safe move. And I'd lived on safe moves for 5 long years. But here's the thing. They didn't know who I really was. They didn't know that once upon a time, I sat in the dark belly of a tent in Kandahar, headset on, translating chatter that could have meant the difference between a convoy making it back or getting blown to pieces. I still remember one night in particular. We picked up a string of dialect that sounded almost like gibberish to the new guys. But to me, it wasn't. I knew it. And because I knew it, we rerouted a squad of Marines who were about to walk right into an ambush. They made it home that night. Some of them probably kissed their kids the next morning because I caught the words in time. I didn't need medals or applause. That was my job. That was who I was. And yet, standing there in that damn officers' club, you'd think I was nothing more than a waitress who didn't know a noun from a verb. The rage that bubbled up inside me wasn't just about me. It was about every soldier who'd been underestimated, every woman who'd been told she didn't belong in uniform, every vet who came home only to be forgotten. And yeah, it was about my father too. He used to say, "Evie, the world doesn't hand you respect. You earn it. And once you earn it, you defend it." Well, I'd earned it once, but I hadn't defended it. I'd hidden it. I looked down at the paper Reeves had tossed in front of me. The writing was faded, jagged, the kind of code they used in the old OSS days before the CIA was even born. Half German, half a bastardized version of an old cipher language we used to study as a side project in my unit. To anyone else, it looked like scratches. To me, it was like hearing an old song you hadn't listened to in years, but still knew all the words. But here was the problem. The second I opened my mouth and read it, the mask I'd built, the mask of Evelyn Carter, the harmless waitress, would crack wide open. Reeves wasn't just a general. He was connected to contractors, lobbyists, the whole national security machine. If he saw what I could do, there'd be no putting the genie back in the bottle. He'd want to know where I came from, what else I knew. And the last thing I could afford was someone digging around in my past. Because if they dug deep enough, they'd find Melora Evans, the girl who was supposed to be dead. So I stood there frozen, tray pressed against my ribs like a shield. I felt my pulse pounding in my ears. The laughter from the table was still echoing, though it was softer now, uneasy, like they weren't sure how far Reeves was going to push the joke. One of the younger captains muttered, "Come on, just leave her be." But Reeves silenced him with a single look. Power does that. And then something strange happened. From the far corner of the bar, one of the old sergeants, Vietnam vet, spent more nights in that place than he did at home, raised his glass at me. Just a tiny nod, nothing flashy. But it was enough. It was like he was saying, "I see you, kid. I know you're more than this. And I'll tell you what, sometimes all it takes is one person believing in you, even if they don't say a word." I straightened up. My hands were still shaking, but my voice was steady. "Sir," I said, locking eyes with Reeves, "with respect, you don't really want me to do this." He leaned back in his chair, smug as ever, and that smirk told me he thought he'd already won. "On the contrary," he said, loud enough for the whole bar to hear, "I insist." And that was it. The line had been drawn. I picked up the paper, and for a split second, I swear the whole room disappeared. It was just me and those words, the way it used to be in the field. I heard my father's voice in my head, calm and firm. Trust your training, Evie. Trust your instincts. My eyes scanned the text, and without even realizing it, my lips began to move. Quiet at first, then louder, until the syllables rolled off my tongue like I'd never stopped using them. The room went quiet, dead quiet. Not a glass clinked, not a chair moved. All the mockery that had filled the air just moments before was gone, replaced by something else. Tension, curiosity, maybe even fear. And me? For the first time in years, I felt alive. Not hidden, not invisible, alive. I didn't give them the full answer. Not yet. I wasn't ready to throw away the one weapon I had left, my anonymity. But I gave them just enough to let them know I wasn't who they thought I was. Just enough for Reeves to realize the waitress he'd tried to humiliate was someone he couldn't quite put back in a box. When I finally put the paper down, my hands were steady. Reeves was staring at me, eyes narrowed, calculating. He didn't smile this time. The smirk was gone. He was looking at me like a man who just stumbled onto something dangerous. Something he wanted, but something he didn't fully understand. And me? I held his gaze, calm as hell on the outside, even though inside I was screaming. Because I knew I'd just crossed a line I could never uncross. The moment I finished reading, I knew I'd crossed into dangerous territory. The laughter that had been bouncing around the officers' club just minutes ago was gone. It was replaced by something heavier, silence, the kind that makes you feel like everyone in the room is holding their breath. I could feel every pair of eyes drilling into me, but none more than General Reeves. The smirk that had been plastered on his face all night was gone, wiped clean like someone had pulled a rug out from under him. For a man like Reeves, silence was rare. He was a talker, a showman, but now he was just staring, trying to process what the hell had just happened. And I'll be honest with you, I almost felt bad for him. Almost. Finally, he leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice low. "Who taught you that?" he asked. No more mockery, no more theatrics. Just a sharp edge of suspicion. I felt my throat tighten. The safe play would have been to shrug, laugh it off, say I'd picked up a few phrases in college or something dumb like that. But it was too late for the mask. They'd seen too much. And once you show people what you're really capable of, they don't forget. Before I could answer, one of the younger officers blurted out, "Sir, did she just say Phoenix Shield?" The words hung in the air like smoke. Phoenix Shield. I knew the name the second I saw the cipher. It was an old black project, buried so deep in the archives, most folks thought it was a myth. A weapons energy hybrid, decades ahead of its time. My father used to whisper about it when he thought I wasn't listening. "If they ever finish it," he said once, "the balance of power will shift forever." And now, by cracking a few lines on a faded sheet of paper, I dragged that ghost of a project back into the light. Reeves's eyes narrowed. He wasn't looking at me like a waitress anymore. He was looking at me like a weapon. "Say it again," he demanded. "What exactly did you read?" I could feel my hands trembling at my sides, but my voice came out steady. "Phoenix Shield," I repeated. "That's what it says." The room shifted. Some of the older vets at the bar straightened in their seats. They knew the name too. Reeves leaned back, exhaling through his nose, like a man trying to calm the storm inside him. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught something else. A face gone pale, tighter than it should have been. Colonel Richard Monroe. Monroe had been around forever, one of those career officers who seemed untouchable. He was Reeves's right hand, the man who handled the dirty details so Reeves could play king in public. He was usually calm, unflappable, but not tonight. The second Phoenix Shield was mentioned, his jaw clenched, his fingers tapped nervously against his glass. It was small, but I caught it. And suddenly, memories I'd buried started clawing their way back. 5 years ago, the night my father died in that so-called accident. I'd been on the phone with him hours before the fire. He told me someone he trusted, someone high-ranking, was coming over to help finalize the last files on his project. My father wasn't a paranoid man, but that night his voice carried an edge I'd never heard before. "If anything happens to me," he said, "don't trust the official story." And then the house went up in flames. They said it was faulty wiring. They said both my father and his friend inside never made it out. But the body they found was burned beyond recognition. Closed casket funeral. I swallowed the story back then because I was too young, too broken to fight it. But now, staring at Monroe's face, pale and sweating under the chandelier light, the puzzle pieces clicked into place. It wasn't faulty wiring, it was betrayal. Reeves, oblivious to the storm ripping through my chest, turned to Monroe. "What do you make of this?" he asked, voice clipped. He trusted Monroe, always had. Monroe cleared his throat, trying too hard to sound casual. "Sir, it's probably nothing. Old codes, rumors. This woman's just fishing for attention." His eyes flicked toward me, sharp and cold, and in that instant, I knew he recognized me, not as Evelyn Carter, as Melora Evans, the girl who was supposed to have died with her father. It was like a gut punch. For years, I'd lived as a ghost, careful with every move, every word, and now in one stupid night, I'd been dragged into the open. Monroe knew, and if Monroe knew, Reeves wouldn't be far behind. I could have stayed quiet, could have swallowed it down, just like I always had. But something in me snapped. Maybe it was the years of silence. Maybe it was seeing Monroe's smug attempt to bury the truth again. Or maybe it was just my father's voice, echoing in my head. "Defend it." I set the paper back on the table and leaned forward, my eyes never leaving Monroe's. "Funny, isn't it?" I said, my tone steady, almost casual. "How some ghosts just refuse to stay buried." Reeves frowned. "What are you talking about?" Monroe shifted in his chair, his discomfort obvious now. "She's bluffing," he muttered. But I wasn't bluffing, not anymore. I looked Reeves dead in the eye. "Ask your colonel," I said softly. "Ask him where he was the night General Evans' house went up in flames. Ask him why the project your paper references disappeared into thin air the same week my father died." The color drained from Reeves's face. Around the table, the younger officers exchanged uneasy glances. You could feel the shift in the air, like the room itself realized something was breaking open. Monroe's hand slammed the table. "That's enough," he barked, his voice cracking louder than he intended. The mask had slipped, and everyone heard it. Reeves turned to him slowly, suspicion dawning in his eyes. He wasn't a fool. He'd built his empire by reading men, and right now Monroe was an open book. I didn't flinch, didn't look away. I let the silence drag, let the weight of it sink in. Then I spoke the words that would change everything. "You think you know who you can trust, General? But the man sitting beside you, he's the reason Phoenix Shield vanished. He's the reason my father is dead." The gasp that rippled through the room was sharp, like air being sucked out all at once. For the first time all night, Reeves looked truly shaken. And Monroe? His eyes met mine, and for just a flicker of a second I saw it. The recognition, the fear. He knew exactly who I was, and he knew the game had just changed. The moment those words left my mouth, the room split in half. You could almost hear it, like a fault line cracking under pressure. On one side were the young officers, shifting uncomfortably in their seats, glancing between Reeves and Monroe like kids watching their parents fight. On the other side were the old-timers, the men who'd been around long enough to know the weight of secrets, their eyes narrowing, silent, waiting to see which way the wind would blow. And right there in the middle sat General Reeves, the man who thought he held all the cards. Except now his most trusted advisor was sweating bullets, and some nobody waitress had just tossed a grenade into his empire. Monroe tried to recover, his voice clipped and sharp. "General, you can't honestly believe this nonsense. She's spinning a story to save face after making a fool of you in front of the entire club." But Reeves wasn't looking at me anymore. He was staring at Monroe like he'd just noticed a snake in his own tent. I could see the wheels turning in his head, running through years of decisions, deals, and late-night conversations. And it hit him, right there in front of everyone. The betrayal had been sitting beside him the whole damn time. Reeves's voice dropped low, the kind of low that makes a man sound more dangerous than if he were shouting. "Why is it," he asked slowly, "that the second she mentioned Phoenix Shield, your face turned white?" Monroe opened his mouth to fire back, but nothing came out, just silence. And in this world, military, politics, whatever, that silence is the closest thing to a confession you'll ever get. I felt my own hands gripping the tray so hard my knuckles turned white. My heart was pounding, but for once, I wasn't afraid. I was angry. Years of hiding, years of swallowing down the truth, all for this moment. I'd been invisible so long, I almost forgot what it felt like to be seen. But now there was no going back. "Sir," I said, turning to Reeves, my voice steady. "My father trusted Monroe. He trusted him enough to let him into our home the night he died. Hours before the fire, my father told me he was close to locking down Phoenix Shield for good. He said someone he trusted was coming to finalize the files. That was Monroe. He killed him. He took what he could and burned the rest." The words landed like bullets. Reeves leaned back in his chair, his hand rubbing his jaw, his mind unraveling every thread of loyalty he thought he had. You could see it in his eyes, rage and disbelief crashing into each other, and underneath it all, shame. Shame that he hadn't seen it sooner. Monroe, cornered, did what cornered men always do. He lashed out. He slammed his fist on the table and growled, "This is treason! You're letting a ghost from the past poison your judgment. She's lying. She's nothing. A washed-up soldier hiding behind a fake name." And that was it. That was the last straw. Before Reeves could answer, one of the old sergeants in the back spoke up. His voice was gravelly, heavy with years of service. "I served under General Evans," he said. "Best damn man I ever knew. And I'll tell you this. If his daughter says Monroe had a hand in his death, I believe her. Because Evans raised her right." The room went dead silent again. It was just one man's voice. But in the military, reputation is everything. And Evans' name still carried weight. You could feel the tide turning, one nod at a time. Reeves finally stood, slow and deliberate, the way generals do when they want every eye on them. He didn't look at me. He looked straight at Monroe. "You're done," he said flatly. No shouting, no theatrics, just a verdict. "From this moment forward, you're suspended. You'll face a full tribunal." Monroe's face went red, then pale like the fight had drained right out of him. He muttered something under his breath, but nobody cared. Two MPs who'd been standing by the door the whole time stepped forward and flanked him. And just like that, the untouchable Colonel Richard Monroe, the man who thought he could bury the truth forever, was walked out of the officers' club in front of everyone. I should have felt triumphant. I should have felt like justice had finally been served. But all I felt was exhaustion. My secret was gone. The mask of Evelyn Carter, the quiet waitress, had been ripped away. Everyone in that room knew I was Melora Evans now, the daughter of a general, the survivor of a fire that wasn't an accident. And that meant the questions would come, the digging, the exposure I'd spent 5 years avoiding. Reeves finally turned to me. For once, his voice wasn't condescending. It wasn't mocking. It was measured. "You should have told me who you were." I shook my head. "Would you have listened?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. We both knew the truth. Later that night, after the chaos had died down, Reeves found me in the hallway. He looked tired, older than I'd ever seen him. "I owe you," he said quietly, "and I don't say that often." He hesitated, then added, "You've got steel in you. Your father would have been proud." I wanted to snap back, to remind him that just an hour ago he tried to humiliate me in front of a room full of officers. But instead I just nodded, because deep down I knew this wasn't about me and Reeves. This was about finally dragging the truth into the light. That night changed everything. Monroe was done. Reeves, for all his arrogance, had been shaken to the core. And me? I wasn't invisible anymore. The whole room had seen me stand tall, had seen me fight back, had seen me claim the respect that had been stolen. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving. I was reclaiming who I was. Not Evelyn Carter, the waitress. Not even Melora Evans, the general's daughter. I was both, and I wasn't hiding anymore. The days that followed felt like living in two worlds at once. On one side, there was the chaos, hearings, press leaks, whispers running through the Pentagon like wildfire. Monroe was finished, his name dragged through mud that he himself had shoveled for years. On the other side, there was me, no longer the quiet woman pouring whiskey behind a bar. People knew now. The ghost had a face again, and a name. Melora Evans. I'd spent 5 years trying to kill that name, to bury it under a false identity so deep nobody would ever find it. And yet, when it finally came back, I didn't feel exposed. I felt free. Scary as hell, sure, but free. Reeves called me into his office not long after Monroe was hauled off. He wasn't the same man I'd seen smirking in that club. The arrogance was still there. Men like him don't just lose it overnight. But there was something else now. A heaviness, a kind of respect that didn't come easy. He leaned back in his chair, eyes locked on me. "You embarrassed me," he said bluntly, "in front of my men, in front of half the damn city." I didn't flinch. "You asked for it." He stared for a long moment before a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Not the smug grin I'd seen before, but something smaller. Real. "Fair enough," he admitted. Then his tone shifted, serious again. "You've got a gift, and this country still needs people like you. I don't care if you've been hiding under an apron or living in the shadows. You don't get to walk away now, not after what you did." For a second, I felt the old anger flare. The idea that he thought he could just draft me back into service like flipping a switch. But then I thought about my father, about how he'd spent his life believing service meant more than a paycheck or a medal. It meant using what you had, your brain, your guts, whatever, to protect the people who couldn't protect themselves. Maybe Reeves didn't mean it that way, but I heard my father in those words, and that mattered. "I'll do it," I said finally, "but on my terms. I won't be somebody's pawn again." Reeves nodded once, firm. "On your terms." And for the first time, I believed him. Weeks later, I stood at Arlington, in front of the white stone marker that bore my father's name. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that only exists in cemeteries where even the wind seems to hush out of respect. I placed my hand on the cold marble and whispered, "It's over, Dad. He paid for what he did, and I'm not hiding anymore." I swear in that moment I felt lighter than I had in years. Life didn't magically turn into sunshine and parades after that. The questions came, the reporters dug, and there were nights I lay awake wondering if stepping out of the shadows had been a mistake. But every time doubt crept in, I remembered that night in the officers' club. The smirks, the laughter, the way I almost walked away, and the way I didn't. That's the thing about life. It'll hand you moments where you can either shrink back down or stand up taller than you ever thought possible. And if you're lucky, you'll get to watch the look on someone's face when they realize the person they thought was nothing turns out to be everything. I still work with Reeves' people now, though I keep my distance. He's not a saint. He never will be. But he learned something that night too. Humility, maybe. The kind of lesson that sticks because it bruised his ego in front of the people he cared about most. We don't talk about it much, but every once in a while he'll catch my eye in a briefing and nod, like an unspoken truce. And me, I built a new life, not hiding from the old one, but carrying it forward. Soldiers started reaching out, men and women who felt overlooked, dismissed, underestimated. Some of them just needed to hear that they weren't alone. Others needed to know that silence doesn't have to be permanent, that there's power in standing up, even if your voice shakes. If you've ever been laughed at, shoved aside, told you were less than, you know what I'm talking about. It burns. But here's what I learned. Sometimes that burn is the very thing that forges you. Sometimes the humiliation, the doubt, the you're nothing moments are the sparks that light a fire you didn't even know you had. That night at the officers' club, Reeves thought he was putting me in my place. He thought he was showing the room that I was small. Instead, he woke me up. He reminded me that hiding wasn't safety. It was surrender. And I don't surrender anymore. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this. Don't ever let someone else's opinion of you become your reality. Respect isn't given. It's earned. And once you earn it, you damn well defend it. That's what my father taught me. That's what I finally learned to do. And maybe, just maybe, if you're sitting there thinking you're invisible, thinking nobody sees what you've got inside you, remember this. Sometimes the most powerful people in the room aren't the ones sitting at the head of the table. Sometimes they're the ones carrying the tray. Life has a way of testing us in the places we least expect. Sometimes it's not a battlefield overseas or a boardroom filled with powerful men. It's a quiet room where someone decides to laugh at you, to remind you of where they think you belong. This story reminds us that silence, while it may feel safe, can also be a prison. The moment we choose to stand up, even with a trembling voice, is the moment we begin to reclaim who we are. True respect isn't about titles or uniforms. It's about courage, integrity, and refusing to let someone else write your story for you. As folks often say, gold doesn't fear the fire. When we walk through injustice with dignity, when we call out betrayal or cruelty for what it is, we come out stronger, clearer, and freer on the other side. For anyone carrying the weight of being overlooked or dismissed, know this: your value isn't diminished just because others can't see it. Sometimes the quietest person in the room holds the most powerful truth, and sometimes the very people who try to break you end up waking up the fighter you'd forgotten you were. I'd love to hear what you think. Have you ever faced a moment when you had to choose between silence and speaking up? Share your thoughts or stories in the comments. If this message touched you, hit that like button and consider subscribing so you won't miss more stories like this. Raw, thought-provoking, and true to the struggles we all carry. And as you leave today, may you carry with you a sense of peace and quiet strength, knowing that even after the storms of life, there's always room for hope, dignity, and a new beginning.